This is my heart, love it from my heart.
Say, I want to say to the people of America and the nations of the world, that we are not about to turn around. Yes, sir. Yes, we're on the move, and no wave of racism can stop us. Like an idea whose time has come. Yes, sir. Not even the marching of mighty armies can halt us. Yes, sir. We are moving to the land of freedom. Yes, sir. Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again.
To every heart and every voice, bid every care withdraw. Let all with one accord rejoice in praise of old Nassau. In praise of old Nassau, my boys, hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. Her sons will give while they shall live. 3 cheers for Nassau.
In 1746, the fathers founded them a school, and although known by various names, Old Nassau was the rule. Today, it's known as Princeton, but those who look to see will find inscribed the former name, College of New Jersey.
There is an ancient faculty, most ancient in renown, that rules an ancient college built in an ancient town. The town is in the inland, far from the ancient sea, a baccalaureus artium in New Jersey, a baccalaureus artium in New Jersey.
The minutes of the Board of Trustees of the College of New Jersey, 1792. A copy of the will of Mr. James Leslie of New York, leaving a certain legacy to the direction of the trustees of New Jersey College for the education of poor and pious youth, with a view to the ministry of the gospel of the Presbyterian Church, was produced to the board. Mr. John Chavis, a free black man of the state of Virginia, was recommended by the Reverend John B. Smith to be received on this fund.
The first black person to attend Princeton University, by the best records we have, was John Chavis, who became a Presbyterian minister and served in North Carolina from 1801 till his death in 1838. John Chavis applied for one of the scholarships given by the Leslie Fund, a fund to help train what they call poor but pious students for the ministry. He was awarded that scholarship in September of 1792. We don't have the rolls of the class that met in 1792. They've been lost, but every tradition is that he was here for at least that year. I think the fact that John Chavis was able to rise to the heights he did, to come to Princeton, to get the attention of John Witherspoon, to go out and organize schools to which wealthy planters sent their sons, to become a minister in the Presbyterian Church, which had markedly high academic standards for its clergy, to be accepted by their presbyteries and assigned churches. I think that's a sign that here's a man who has a spark of divinity in him.
On Pell pass from hall to hall, the men of Princeton pass, while others low for toss the ball
a letter to John Rogers. I would say that while there is nothing in the law of the university to prevent a Negro's entering, the whole temper and tradition of the place are such that no Negro had ever applied for admission, and it seems extremely unlikely that the question will ever assume a practical form. Woodrow Wilson, 1904.
Virginia Theological Seminary and College, Lynchburg, Virginia, November 20th, 1909. To the Honorable Woodrow Wilson, Princeton University, Princeton, New Jersey. Honorable Sir, I want so much to come to your school at Princeton. I'm a poor Southern colored man from South Carolina, but I believe I can make my way if I'm permitted to come. Please, sir, send me a catalog and information as to whether a colored man may enter there. Yours sincerely, G. MacArthur Sullivan.
A note to Personal Secretary Charles Williston McAlpin. Regret to say that it is altogether inadvisable for a colored man to enter Princeton. Appreciate the desire to do so, but strongly recommend his securing education in a Southern institution. Woodrow Wilson.
I wasn't aware till well on how unpopular Woodrow Wilson is with the black community because of his civil rights stand in the First World War period. Wilson had always been a hero for me, and he did more to raise this university up and move it into the 20th century than any president. Well, maybe not more than McCosh and Witherspoon, but he did an enormous amount to do that. And I used to talk about him. And I found myself once talking to a bunch of black students about Woodrow Wilson, my not knowing that they were in a completely different wavelength than I was about him. Wilson, certainly during the First World War, was a racist. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he barred blacks from all kinds of civil service opportunities during the war period, and I had just been unaware of that part of his life, too. I centered my attention on his work here at Princeton and then on his work for the League of Nations.
When I received the award of the scholarship in the midst of the Great Depression, it was wonderful. I mean, we were joyous and happy, and it solved the problem because I was very sad before that. I had no idea what I would do. I knew I didn't want to be like my father, work 2 or 3 jobs. And I stood in the registration line, as I was told to do. Some of the people there apparently accepted my presence without a question. And I was approached by an upperclassman who was there to help freshmen, who asked me my name, disappeared, came back, said the Dean of Admissions would like to see you. Not the Dean of Freshmen, but the Dean of Admissions. And I followed him into the office of Radcliffe Heermans, then the Dean of Admissions. And that's when he confronted me, looking at me as though I was a disgusting specimen under a microscope. He said, the race problem is beyond solution in America, a Christian country. He said, and if you're trying to come here, you're going to be someplace where you're not wanted. He encouraged me to go to a college of my own kind. I was shattered, and I became more so as time went on. And for some reason, I persisted in writing to Heermans to demand to know why. Was I a menace, a danger to a great university that had existed since the colonial days? It's dated June 13th, 1939. Dear Mr. Wright, Princeton University does not discriminate against any race, color, or creed. What a lie. This is clearly set forth in the original charter of the college and the tradition has been maintained throughout the life of the university. Now let me give you a purely personal reaction, and I speak as one who has always been particularly interested in the colored race, because I have had very pleasant relations with your race, both in civilian life and in the Army. I cannot conscientiously advise a colored student to apply for admission to Princeton simply because I do not think that he would be happy in this environment. There are no colored students in the university, and a member of your race might feel very much alone. There are, moreover, a number of Southern students enrolled in the college. This has been a tradition of long standing in Princeton. And as you know, there is still a feeling in the South quite different from that existing in New England. My personal experience would enforce my advice to any colored student that he would be happier in an environment of others of his race. Very sincerely yours, Radcliffe Heermans. The exclusion from Princeton of blacks over a century and a half during that period, it meant for me that the university was betraying its mission.
It means a terrible kind of deprivation. It means that the educational opportunities here, which we think are good ones, and at other places like Princeton, were being denied, were not available to aspiring young black men and later black women. And that was bad. I mean, if I look at it in hindsight, it's terrible. But I can see that culturally the nation was locked in a different posture.
Despite Princeton's history of a very great distinction and achievements, there is, like there is so often, an element or theme of tragedy that comes through Princeton's history, namely its own inadequacy in reaching out and including many members of our society who were capable of contributing greatly to the future of this university.
It's hard to say anything really new about the historical failure of almost all of the predominantly white institutions. There are a few notable exceptions. Oberlin, I would say, is a notable exception. To enroll significant numbers of black students until after the war. It's sad to say it, but I think it's true that people just didn't think much about the question.
When the sons of Princeton gather anywhere, there's a place they think of longing to be there. It's the one and only university, situated and celebrated in New Jersey. Going back, going back, going back to Nassau Hall.
Most of the time I was at Princeton, I was not aware. I didn't think about the fact that there were no Negroes at Princeton. My schooling had been in private schools, which were lily white. And I have to credit Frank Broderick, probably really made me sit down and think about it. And once I'd started thinking about it, it seemed to me to be outrageous. Frank Broderick, who decided that this was what he wanted to do, that is to say, conduct a campaign by the Princetonian in favor of the admission of Negroes to Princeton. And I thought it was a great idea. And we worked very closely together and wrote some very strong editorials, which we linked our argument very definitely with the war.
Princeton does not admit Negro students. While the United States seeks to propagate among its 1,000 million colored allies confidence in America's promises of universal freedom without discrimination because of race, color, or creed, and while 13 million Negro Americans look for signs of their admission to a rightful place in American democracy, Princeton continues its principle of white supremacy, and in an institution devoted to the free pursuit of truth, implicitly perpetuates a racial theory more characteristic of our enemies than of an American university.
Going back, going back, going back, going back, going back to Nassau Hall. Say it again. Going back, going back, going back, going back to the best old place of all. Say it again. I'm going back, going back, I'm going back, going back, going back to Nassau Hall. I'm going back, going back, I'm going back to the best old place of all. I'm going back, going back, I'm going back. From all this.
I called my mother, and because we'd had some discussion about that there are no blacks at Princeton. So, Mom, I'm going to be home tonight, because when I get down there and they find out what I am, I'm sure that's the end of pre-med at these two schools, either Columbia or Princeton.
I came from Oklahoma, a completely different geography and a completely different socio-economic environment. And now, from the small campus of Langston University to the exalted atmosphere of the Ivy League.
Yes, there was a degree of apprehension, but I had a philosophical attitude about it. Whether I stayed or not, I was going to, one of these days, become a doctor.
You had students whose academic background was probably no better or worse than my own, so that you fit right in academically.
I packed up my duffel bag and my books and got on the train, went down there, and to my surprise, I was welcomed.
Even the language was different. When you talk about the seminars, the lectures, the whole idea, the preceptorial. I'd never heard of a preceptorial. So it was just an entirely new world for me.
It was the same old, same old. It was the same environment of Caucasian people that I felt comfortable about all my life up to this point. So no reason why it should change.
The fellows had their families, their girlfriends, fiancés, and whatnot coming from out of town to visit them. Pete Wilson was from Chicago. I was from Oklahoma, so we had no immediate visitors. And as a result, we made friends in the community and enjoyed ourselves socially there in the community.
For me, it worked out fine. For some youngsters that perhaps have been more deeply immersed in social contacts among Negroes, they may have found it very difficult. I didn't feel I was missing anything. And consequently, I felt comfortable at home. I had my books, and that was my company.
There was almost an understanding that the friends with whom I associated with during the week, on weekends when their friends and families came, if they spoke to me, I would speak to them. If they did not, then that was a clue to me that they would just as soon not be deemed to be an associate of mine. So therefore, I didn't say anything.
I've never, to my recollection, had any unfriendly or well, I guess that's the best way to describe it, unfriendly encounters, unfriendly, unpleasant, none of that. I wasn't looking for it, it never came up.
You even had people rooting for you right there in Princeton. 2 black guys at the university. So you had so many people who were really depending on you for success. Even though you didn't know them, they knew that you were at the university.
I was aware at the time that I graduated that I was the first black student to receive a degree. And that was 1947 in the university's 200th bicentennial. My chest was out, and I was happy and proud, and I looked upon it as an achievement.
When the sons of Princeton gather anywhere, there's a place they think of longing to be there. It's the one and only university, situated and celebrated in New Jersey.
I, and I think most of the people I knew and associated with, lived in an all-white, predominantly male kind of world. and we didn't realize what we were missing. And not much occurred to make us realize that. As I read about the protests in the South, and, as I became aware of Martin Luther King and the kind of leadership he was providing and whatnot, it made me aware of how narrow the society in which I and this institution were operating.
We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
That was a transforming event for me. I had come from Canada, and it was as a student, a graduate student here at Princeton, that I first became aware of the American Civil Rights Movement and the importance of the issues that they were facing. And the signal event for me was going to the March on Washington, where I heard Martin Luther King.
The civil rights movement affected me very deeply, and it really woke me up. And I decided that we simply had to do something here to get Princeton to take a part in educating able young blacks and helping them become full and fruitful members of the society.
People were less, how shall we say, introspective, less inclined to question fundamental assumptions such as who's this school for and who's coming here. It just wasn't an issue really on the table. But then, of course, events in society, culminating in all of the civil rights activities, put those issues on the agenda.
Well, I didn't encounter any obstacles from the trustees or members of the university community. There were some alumni who were quite opposed to that, and some of them wrote to me, some of them talked with me.
I suppose if there was an underlying concern, it was, will the place as I knew it from the perspective of an alumnus still be the same? And my answer to that always was no, it won't. It'll be a better place.
Goheen, when I first came to Princeton, he really showed vision in that he, I think, understood at a time where people were still questioning whether or not you wanted minority students on your campus at all. I think Goheen was clear and clearly committed to having a cross-section of students.
At that time, I didn't realize how much of an experiment we were. Okay, the black students that were coming in. I didn't know about the Goheen mandate. I didn't know about Carl Fields coming in just to sort of tie this thing together, you know. And so in essence, we were sort of like guinea pigs. You know, it was a system that they were trying to devise, okay, to meet a certain mandate and project a certain image.
These were not easy things, and I think one mistake that was made was to assume that this new group of students could be incorporated just as readily as scholarship students and foreign students and other students had in times gone by. And it was not that easy. It took work and patience and learning and mistakes.
Well, I think the commitment, at least from my perspective, was very, very strong at the top. The president, and I went through like 3 different presidents. All of the presidents seemed to be committed. Their cadre of people were also committed. I think the further it dwindled down into the various departments where there were blocks, and still are incidentally, of just all white departments, I think there was a lesser commitment towards diversity.
As we go back to Nassau.
I insisted, and faculty course of study committee agreed with me that we should not admit blacks here who we thought could not make the grade. That if they had very inadequate preparation, lacked self-confidence, whatnot, they were just going to come here and fall on their faces and be unhappy, and we would do them a disservice.
As a young Schaefer, 5 years old, being thrown in again into an environment which was totally Caucasian, and all the way through the elementary school and all the way through the high school.
We knew that the whites segregated system was better than ours, but ours were adequate for our purposes.
There seemingly were no barriers. Now, I wasn't that naive that I was unaware that there were barriers, since I was the grandson of a slave, and I knew my grandfather.
Socially, you had the segregated system. It was accepted, it was understood, and you lived with it.
My mother was a single parent. I was a scholarship student throughout high school, and she was one of those parents who believed in the American dream.
My mother made the comment when she wrote me my first allowance check when I was about to board the flight. And I said, "Mother, you don't have to do this. I've got enough money." She said, "Well, we not only want you to go to Princeton, but we want you to go to Princeton in style." And they were very proud of that because they were working people. They had sold the business and had achieved some financial success.
We were one generation removed from being sharecroppers, and my generation was really the first generation within the family that had the opportunity to go straight to college.
It was a 4-room schoolhouse that went from kindergarten through 8th grade, and the bathrooms were outside, you know.
It was such a different experience for me coming from a boarding school, an all-boys boarding school.
The day that I left my neighborhood in Philadelphia, we loaded up the car, and all the kids and all the neighbors, everybody came out and followed that car up the block. They were proud of me, and this was at a time when there was still a fair amount of optimism about what we as a people were going to accomplish.
They wanted you to do well, you know, because at that time in the South, in Jackson, Mississippi at least, there was this sort of camaraderie and belief that you could change the world and you can make things better, and that people of my generation were going to make a difference.
Oh, Nassau, 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 this is my home, love from my heart.
I arrived on campus and I saw children getting out of these huge luxury cars and looking really quite wealthy, and unpacking big stereos and all of this electronic equipment. And I had a little Victrola, and it was, I felt immediately intimidated and that I was out of my league.
I arrived at Princeton when it was at its most glorious, with all abloom, and its English Gothic architecture, and these students who were my ideal, quite frankly.
The first time I came to Princeton, it was like visiting another planet, to tell you the truth. It was so different.
I thought, I'm really in the country now.
When I arrived on campus for the first time, I was a little bit intimidated. I said, wow, I wonder if they made a mistake by accepting me, you know. Am I going to fit in, you know, those kinds of feelings. You know, will I be the dumbest person here?
This looked to me like the most isolated place I had ever seen.
Beautiful campus, being able to be on my own.
I thought everyone in the Ivy Leagues, they were all geniuses, you know.
I expected it to be a bunch of really nerdy kids, kind of this Einsteinian vision of Princeton.
A room of my own that wasn't in the ghetto with roaches.
It looked like a multitude of white people. I mean, I think that was the most white people I ever remember being around, right? It seemed like it must have been thousands.
I had an unusual roommate, very, very rich boy from the South, who had particularly wrote on his application that he wanted to live with the black or Spanish, just to disturb his parents.
My first impression was, this is a huge mistake. I've made a big mistake.
I came up here cold, and as soon as I set foot on campus, I loved it.
In many ways, this was an institution pretty heavily tilted toward the South. And from its early, more religious days, it drew a lot of Scotch Presbyterians out of Virginia and Georgia and the Carolinas. Used to be called the northernmost of the southern colleges by some people. And so there was, well, there were those prejudices at work, I think.
Princeton was the one place where if you had a segregationist attitude, okay, or would like to cherish that attitude a little longer before real life hits you after you graduated, this was the place to come to, because at least there you were welcomed and there were no strong pressures that were going to dissuade you from flying your Confederate flag.
Well, we know historically Princeton has been the Ivy League school for Southern gentlemen, and therefore they tended to be quite tardy when it came to admitting black people, not until 1947 or 8, I think it is. Harvard's 1870, Yale's a little bit after, so that Princeton was about a little less than 100 years behind, actually, when it comes to dealing with issues of race. And it was primarily due, I think, to that legacy of producing a disproportionate number of Southern elites.
The first few months I was on campus was when George Wallace, the then governor of Alabama, was coming to campus. Or maybe he wasn't governor at that time, but hey, of course he had been governor. And he was making his speaking tour, speaking his message of segregation, and I recall that some of us organized an event, a media event, where we basically burned him in effigy. People decided, okay, we're going to go to this talk that he gives. Everybody's going to put on suits and ties, show we're respectable Negroes, you know. We're not just wild Negroes. And then, like gentlemen, we'll get up and walk out as he begins to speak. And that shows, you know, that we're protesting, but we're not being disruptive. So that's what we did.
Growing up in southern New Jersey, where I always knew my limitations in that white community, I did not date. I did not go to the dances. I did not go into the homes of people. And in fact, I was almost lynched in one instance where I got caught on a dark road late at night by a group of very poor whites who had been trying to get at me for years. But the fact that I grew up in this discriminatory, very restrictive environment in the Northeast helped me to cope with what I experienced at Princeton.
I think you expected to be, in some large respect, an outsider. I mean, you knew that when you went to Princeton, the full benefits of the social and academic life were not going to be accessible to you.
There were people at Princeton who wouldn't talk to me because I was black.
Well, what happened is that I was admitted to Princeton as a white student, and I graduated from Princeton as a black student, and so I spent my 4 years there dealing with the transition, and quite a few many years afterwards. I hope that I've come to grips with it by this time, but it's a never-ending factor in American society.
I'm the manager of the track team, and the team heads off on their spring trip to the South with the idea that I couldn't go or was not going to go. That didn't bother me so much, but what bothered me was the fact that no one really came to talk about it.
Everyone assumed that I would be captain of the Naval ROT's rifle team. I wasn't given that position. And I was told by the Marine MOI, the military officer, Marine officer instructor, that I was not given that position because they thought the other people would have a difficult time if I was the captain.
I break up the experiences that I had racially at Princeton into three categories: the overt acts, the insidious ones that I realized later were probably a direct result of some form of racism, and those that I never knew about.
I had a party in was it Brown Hall, and some jocks came in and tried to crash it, but they didn't realize we were a new breed. We were a new breed of Princetonians, you know. My class was the first major was one of the largest concentrations of blacks. Before that, I think the class that I was in had more blacks than all the classes together, our freshman class. And there were a lot of us who were kind of from
you know, from the heart of the ghetto. And so when they came to crash the party, they never crashed the party again.
When I got there in 1969, there were a lot of racial incidents, you know, with other, you know, white people there that just wanted to physically, you know, get abusive, right? And I was never one to really shirk away from that sort of thing, right? And so I had, you know, at least 3 or 4 major fights with people, you know, about, you know, like they wanted to kick my ass, you know, and I just wasn't going for it. And it had nothing to do with anything but race.
I was born actually in a country where there are no whites. And I came here, and I'd heard about racism, and I thought the racism that I would find would be very overt, you know, people yelling, you know, racial slurs at you. But what I found instead, that the racism that you find is very subtle.
No, no one came up to me and called me a bad name, but that didn't make the being the other less painful. The fact that people didn't come up and call me a name, the walls were screaming the names.
If you have to ask me my race, I have to tell you human.
I did encounter difficulties due to my race many times. I didn't focus on them as being turning points in my life because, see, I'm old enough to say that I have actually sat in the back of a bus. I have not been able to go into swimming pools because of my race. And I have been kicked out of cafeterias because they thought I shouldn't be eating there. So, you know, compared to those things, well, I encountered at Princeton was just sort of, you know, an extension of them.
You know, it's like I don't dwell on it. I mean, because were those the most significant things that ever happened to me in my life because of race? No. I mean, I was locked up in jail in Lake Providence, Louisiana, and thought they were going to kill me and throw me in the river because I was down there doing voter registration. You know, that has a more lasting impact, you know, on my memory cells, you know, than anything that ever happened at Princeton.
I remember a classmate walking up to me and saying, "You're one of the smart black students, you know, so you can be honest with me. Most of these black students don't deserve to be here, do they?"
I basically spent a lifetime trying to, quote, prove, end quote, to white people that I was as good as they were. And I gave that up when I got to Princeton. I realized there was no longer any need to prove to white folks anything. I am who I am.
For me, there was negative attention in the classroom when you open your mouth and everybody turns to hear what you say, and they're not turning to hear what you say because they think you're going to say something wonderful, but they're turning to hear what you say like, what on earth could she come up with, or like they're looking at some bug under a microscope.
I didn't even experience the kind of slights in class that maybe some other students perceived or experienced.
Right.
So I'm not naive in suggesting that it didn't go on.
As an African, Greek, American student at Princeton, people deal with you a lot differently if they think that you're white than they do if they think that you're black. I mean, you could say that, but I can tell you that that's the truth.
You've got the old racist stereotype of black people being less than, less intelligent than, less beautiful than, having less moral character than others, and therefore I think when a number of black freshmen show up, they have to deal with these perceptions.
The problem of stereotypes and at the toll that stereotypes take, both on, in this case, minority students themselves because they feel those stereotypes, and on other people who are dealing with them. And that is, sadly, I think a consequence of a history of this country, of a history of slavery, of a history of oppression, discrimination. And those things don't go away in a second.
I mean, I could fill up hours of specific overt racist occurrences that I experienced at Princeton. But then I could turn it over on the other side and fill up hours with people who were good and friends and roommates, and in fact, some of my best friends today are my classmates from Princeton.
Athletically, I had expectations, great expectations. Now, I played for all 4 years, and I was the quarterback for the last 2 years. We were like 5-6 one year and 6-5 the next, about 500. We had a number of black players who had a lot of problems there. You know, there were times when we tried to analyze it, and you know, if you look at the history of black football players at Princeton, there were very few. My freshman year, I believe, there were about 5 or 6 in the entire program. And that was the year that the black players opened negotiations with the school, and indeed, I believe, many of them resigned from the program.
If they weren't automatically accepted in the classroom and automatically accepted as roommates and socially on the campus, then what would make you think that because they scored 3 touchdowns or because they were an outstanding basketball player, that they would automatically be accepted as a star? And they weren't.
I, at various points in time, had my own problems, both with the coaches and with some of the players. I got the impression from time to time that many of them had never taken instruction, taken direction from a black quarterback, and we just made do. I mean, you communicate as best you can, you try to win as many ball games as you can. I found that the less I spent memorizing and trying to react to situations, and the more I spent trying to analyze players and coaches, and there was just too much confusion, and I couldn't deal with it. So I thought really that the best thing to do was really not to even think about it. I would walk around there sometimes, I believe, really in a fog, because there was just too much to memorize, too much to do, too much to deal with. I just didn't want to have to think about the coaches and the way they were treating me.
Well, from the academic point of view, I think it was excellent. It was the best. I mean, I really have the highest praise for the professors, the classes. I mean, that was a joy.
It was an opportunity where you really got to think, you know, where you really got to solve problems and you really got to do sort of free-form thinking.
I developed just a tremendous framework for analysis.
But in terms of the quality of education I was getting in teaching you discipline and academic inquiry and rigorous academic bent, it was superlative.
I felt that it was the only period in my life where I really went through a lot of self-doubt in terms of my own abilities to succeed. And by the time I left, I didn't feel that way anymore.
They put the fear of God in me. I came in and I said, geez, they just said basically that all you black people may not make it. So you're going to have to work twice as hard.
To be absolutely truthful, there were mornings that I woke up crying because it was so hard.
They were happy tears and sad tears. Sad because I wasn't living up to my own expectations of what I wanted to write, but they were happy tears because I never had expected that I could do the kind of research that I was doing.
And I called home one night very discouraged, and I got my father on the phone and I said, Dad, you know, I'm working day and night, you know, I'm busting it. I'm not getting the A's that I've been accustomed to getting. And I'm working 6 hours a day and I don't know what else I can do outside the classroom to be successful. And he said, boy, let me tell you one thing. When I was your age, I was working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day in a foundry. And that's the last time I ever complained about working hard in Princeton.
He couldn't explain to me what he meant when he said I couldn't write. The thing that saved me was that there was one black graduate school student in European history, Andrew Barnes, and I went to him and I showed him my midterm, and he said, what you have to understand is this particular preceptor is from Oxford, and at Oxford they're used to a particular style of argument, and you don't know that particular style of argument. So let me teach you that style of argument.
I had a sort of a mentor. His name was Henry Drury, and I told him when I was a freshman how intimidated I was by Princeton and by the professors, and he suggested that I invite professors to lunch or dinner at Wilson College, which is where I lived. And so whenever I was really intimidated by a professor or an instructor, that's what I would do. And it helped me to relate to them as human beings.
I find it ironic because the professors who are older and from another generation and who should have been more bigoted or more set in their ways were not so. I actually felt that with few exception, I was openly embraced and challenged by the folks who taught me in the classroom.
You know, as I talked more to the upperclassmen, they said, look, you've got to get to know your professors, you've got to be proactive, they have to know who you are. And it helps. I mean, I think you do better. And I think that if called upon, most professors respond.
Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps because of racial reasons, perhaps because of political reasons, I really didn't approach professors that much outside of the classroom.
It was a culture clash. It's a class clash. It's a race clash.
That's part of being in the United States in the mid to late 1960s when, of course, Jim Crow and segregation had not been fully and completely wiped out.
No matter how much they might like for me to have been just like, you know, another guy from a Pennsylvania prep school, you know, I wasn't. No matter how much I would have liked for them to have been like a black teacher I had in high school, they weren't.
And so this sense of alienation, which is partly a product of stereotyping, and it's partly a problem of having been excluded for a long while. Wondering, am I really welcome? Is this what people really think? My own view is, for better or for worse, that some real progress has been achieved and that there's much more honesty in conversation now than there was in the 60s and the 70s and so forth.
When alums of Princeton gather anywhere, there's a place they think of longing to be there. It's the one and only university, situated and celebrated in New Jersey. Going back to Nassau. Going back to the best damn place of all.
I had gone along happily in a monastic Princeton as a student and teaching only men when I was on the faculty. But the American society changed, and women began to have a much more prominent role in many different walks of life. And I had daughters and a wife who sensed and represented some of this. And again, I just felt we were out of touch with what had happened in the American society.
Coeducation was not easy to accomplish, in part because there were conflicting objectives. One was size, not wanting the university to become too big, and yet to add a whole new population.
100 women out of 3,200 men, and there were 12 black women, 6 freshmen, a few transfers.
All the women lived in Pine Hall, and they someone determined in this great social event that they should really furnish that area different. They should put curtains up. We needed to be treated differently in a kind of cutesy way.
There was a dean who was supposed to kind of be shepherding us along.
However, all the larger issues, that is, for instance, going to a class and being accepted, there was no preparation for that. There was no training that professors took.
There were concerns about living arrangements and what would make for a proper set of intellectual as well as social relationships on the campus. A mistake was made initially in segregating the women to certain dorms, bad idea. We figured that out and changed it.
We hired a couple of women deans. We got an advisory committee of women educators from outside to counsel us on dormitory arrangements and curriculum arrangements and so on. And we did everything we could to try to make the place receptive.
Women were shipped in every weekend, or the guys shipped out to the women every weekend.
To go to these mixers so the men would have something social to do, to let off the steam for this pressure-filled week that they've had studying.
They partied, they ran around drinking beer and doing, I guess, awful fraternity type things.
You know, you didn't date a co-ed, I mean, at Princeton. It wasn't that kind of a thing. They were just kind of a part of this experiment, a little bit competitive. You know, who really wants to go out with somebody who's as bright or brighter than you anyway? So it left us kind of not knowing exactly where we were, a state of confusion.
There were growing pains. And again, women haven't been the same, treated the same in society as men, though that too has fortunately changed a lot.
Those first few classes, I thought they had a hard time, but they were great troopers. They stuck it through.
One day in 1963, when I got a call, and the guy said, "I'm from Princeton, and I'm interested to know whether or not you would be willing to come to Princeton and join us in the administrative category." I said, "Let me tell you what I know about Princeton." And I brought back all the negative things that I could think of. I said, "You wouldn't even accept Paul Robeson. And my God, you know, and here you are looking at me and saying, you want me to become a part of the administration in a place that I know has no love for blacks." And he said, "Yes, we do."
If Carl Fields hadn't been at Princeton when I was there, I know I would have made it.
Well, Carl was enormously important and valuable, not just to the black community by any means, but to the whole community.
He was extremely proactive long before the word, I think, was invented. Carl organized meetings, wanted to know specifically what the problems were, took these problems to upper level administration, and either got solutions or found out why solutions couldn't be had.
He was a person of empathy and understanding, but he was also a grown-up, and he understood things don't always work out the way you want them to work out, and one of the real tests of character is, can you accept the disappointment and come back?
He would tell us what he had to go through because he went to St. John's. And he was a track star, and he was a trailblazer at St. John's in the late 40s, just like we were at Princeton. That what we were going through might not have been nice, but it wasn't unique, you know. And we had the same challenge in our generation that he had in his.
And I thought back to my own college days, and fortunately, St. John's was only a 10-minute walk from my house. So I could be in my community almost every day if I wanted to. My church was not too far away, so I went to my church on a regular basis. And I realized how much support that had been to me. And I figured that people being what they are, these guys would need that kind of support too.
Carl Field's program to have families in town was just a brilliant notion. We didn't know we needed them, but we did.
It wasn't our intent to look over their shoulders or try to mom and pop them, but to let them know that we were here. And that, yes, they had a place to come to, or they could pick up the telephone and call us if they chose.
The students needed a support system which included, some home cooking and some good folks they can sit down and talk to and relate to and without going crazy.
The family sponsors were proud to be connected with the university in another way, with black students being there, because before that, it was just that people worked over there and the relationship was there wasn't a relationship beyond just working over there. So I think to say again that we were just so proud that blacks at last had been admitted in some numbers.
I was born in Princeton and raised in Princeton. When I was young and people would ask, where do you want to go to college, I would say Princeton, not knowing that we didn't go to Princeton. My grandfather moved here from Virginia around 1910 or so and worked in Tower Club as the steward for just about all of his adult life, I think about 50 years. I have since become a member of Tower Club as an undergraduate, became an officer, and now I'm on the graduate board at Tower Club.
Right.
So we have gone from the servant class to the ruling class in 2 generations.
Right.
This takeover of Nassau Hall was a very, very serious event, and it was something that we took very seriously. It was with the aid of some of the white students that actually made that happen. They dressed up as corporate representatives, and they made appointments to see certain people, and they went to have those appointments, and at a certain point they opened the exit doors all around the building so we wouldn't all be coming in at one way, and at a certain point all 210 of us were in Nassau Hall. And you know what was really amazing was how it seemed like the whole campus came to our assistance, but people were in the various cafeterias and eating halls, making food for us, sending blankets to us. It was one of the few moments in my life when I really felt part of a larger human family. There was certainly solidarity among the black students, and I felt part of that. You know, I felt a certain loyalty, but the students who went in weren't just black. You know, many of them were black, but some were white, some were Hispanic, we had some Native Americans with us. There were few on campus at that time. Some were Asian, and it was one of those few times in my life where I actually saw people of different races come together and unite for a common cause, and that was a great cause, the cause of liberation, not only for South Africa, but against forms of oppression that existed here in this country. I remember one of the most moving moments of that part of the movement was Billy Gover was a Native American, and he wrote his mother, still living on the reservation, a letter about his involvement as a Native American in this struggle at this predominantly white university to free black people in South Africa. And she wrote back to him, and he read that letter to about 600 of us.
She said, "Kevin, South Africa sounds a lot like home." And I realized that my grandmother knew all about apartheid. And then she said, maybe they'll realize that just as the white people in South Africa cannot continue to kill the black babies, the white people here cannot continue to kill our babies. She said, you and your friends, you keep on fighting for those people because you're fighting for us too.
And I remember that day that Billy Gover read that letter and how it moved so many people, you know, because his mother was drawing parallels between how Native Americans in this country were being treated and how that was similar to how black people were being treated in South Africa. And, you know, that was just an experience I'll never forget. That whole experience. And I think one of the successes is, when you ask me about successes at Princeton, out of that movement that we had for the struggle in South Africa against apartheid, many of those students went on to become adults with careers and families. In many ways, they have continued their activism. They're involved in different struggles across the country and around the world. And I think that's one of the real successes.
My parents had not had the ability, as I had at that time, to go to college. Their ability to send me to a place like this in style was very, very important to them. So I will never forget that, and I will never forget how proud they were in June of 1974 when they were sitting out on the lawn in front of Nassau Hall watching their firstborn and the first in our family's history to graduate from a place like this. I'll never forget that look on their faces.
Having a Princeton degree was a ticket to notoriety, which I really didn't want.
I often don't tell them.
I usually don't let them know.
Sometimes people don't take it very well. They assume that you're an ally of white supremacy.
I've always looked at credentials, if you're a minority, as never really securing you the same kind of place or comfort as if you were white.
For my first 10 or 15 years, I viewed having been to Princeton as a liability. Oh, you're a smart nigger. You know, these are blacks, you know, treating me like that. Or people say, oh, rich kid, huh? I was anything but rich. You know, oh, a snob, huh? A Ivy League snob, you know. I didn't need that.
I really owe a lot of my career success to being at Princeton. I work for an organization that, at that time, really gravitated toward Ivy League students.
I have experienced the prestige that having gone to Princeton brings, the types of jobs I've been able to get, and also it changed how I viewed myself.
There are 40 years of my life that I spent elsewhere other than at Princeton, but there are people in the business world, they will say, Princeton man. And I think that's really bizarre, but you know, I play it.
They'll say, they had women there then, and I know that really means they had black people there then.
Well, I even wear a Princeton ring now, see. That was in the vault for a long time. Okay. I mean, for my first 15 or 20 years out of Princeton, I never wore it, but now I wear it, okay? So I wouldn't say that I'm rah-rah, but I have accepted the fact of where I went and what it can do for me and what it can do for other people. It's been a long, hard transition. Got over a lot of bitterness, yeah.
Can I describe my Princeton experience in one word? That's a $64 million billion now. It's no longer a million question. Wonderful.
Wonderful.
It's an emotional roller coaster.
Unforgettable. Productive, I think.
Very maturing.
It was useful.
Fun. Artificial microcosm.
Awesome.
Long. I wanted it to be over.
I was bitter.
It's eye-opening.
Maybe elusive.
Enlightening.
It's like another lifetime for me.
Challenging.
Hectic.
Great opportunities.
Treacherous.
Contradictions.
Dangerous.
Hypocrisy.
Depressing.
Painful. Frightening.
I enjoyed it.
I had a lot of fun.
A gas.
Challenging.
American society in a microcosm.
I would say that Princeton has been a very good influence in that it has given me a higher expectation. In other words, I was able to go to a university where I would never have believed that I would have been given such an opportunity. And so it's given me the chance to believe in possibilities.
It in many ways, I guess, elevated my aspirations for achievement. Basically, that's what college meant to me, was a chance to achieve and to succeed.
You asked me how I feel about Princeton. Well, it's a strange emotion. I mean, it's a complex emotion. It's not just that I'm gung-ho, I'm going to wave a flag. I really, sometimes that bothers me a little bit sometimes. I mean, and sometimes I really can get quite upset with Princeton. But I think when it's all over, and it's been a bittersweet, up and down, crazy roller coaster, but it's been a nice trip.
It taught me how to get along with people who thought that they were a lot better than I was. It taught me how to get along with people who came from very rich families who thought that they didn't need to deal with somebody like me. It taught me that I could be just as good as they were.
You know, I still give something in annual giving. You know, I try to show up for things, and, you know, I've served on, you know, a couple of committees and given lectures on occasion there when I've been asked to. And I think basically I do that out of loyalty. Even though I had a lot of problems at Princeton, you know, I sort of remain loyal to them because they stood by me, you know. And that may sound weird in a way, but even though I caught a lot of hell academically there, most of it I brought on myself, I still feel that there was something special about them because they saw something in me.
I value my association with Princeton. As I said, I value the relationships. It reminds me of what they tell you in the U.S. Army, that when you go out into the battlefield, you don't necessarily fight and die for your country. You fight and die for that buddy who's right next to you in the foxhole. And so that's why I look at Princeton. I mean, what I value about it is that buddy next to me in the foxhole or next to me in the dorm room. And that is to say that the friends I made.
One of the gratifying things right now is that the university seems to be more committed than any time that I've known it as a place that really does believe that its alumni and their students really have an obligation to do community service, and that's something that I'd like to think that we in the 60s played a small part in moving the university toward.
Give a demonstration that not only can you graduate from Princeton successfully as a black student, right, but that you can go on and have a life and a career
thereafter,
and then still come and give back to people who are like you and here now.
This is probably going to be one of the most challenging environments that your children will enter into, but it's challenging for everybody.
Princeton was very painful, and it has taken a long time to get enough distance on that pain to be able to recognize some of the good things that did happen there.
I'm really glad I went to Princeton, in spite of all of the, I mean, no pain, no gain. Princeton was a drag, but I'm glad I went there.
What makes an institution of higher learning great is the degree to which it allowed for those students to come through, to grow, to mature, to push themselves, to challenge themselves, and then to continue a legacy, to build on the best of the Princeton past, because the Princeton past does have its own greatness at its best.
So I don't consider that our achievements, substantial as they are at all adequate yet. That our aspirations are moving ahead, if anything, even faster than our achievements. And in terms of faculty and staff and students, Princeton has a good ways to go yet before I feel that we have really given everyone in America an opportunity to participate here.
Princeton, at no time would I believe that it would be any different than the rest of the country and the rest of the society. So as the country changes and society changes, you know, Princeton would change. I don't think Princeton is ever going to be a place that's going to be on the leading edge, you know, of social change.
If an individual is aggressive enough to feel like Princeton is his or her school, not my roommate's school, not the school where my father or mother went, but this is my school. And they're aggressive enough to take advantage of all of the opportunities at Princeton. I think it can be a good place for an undergraduate or graduate education.
The time was right for Princeton to look for some black students, and a few of us some knowing and some unknowing guinea pigs accepted. And I think each of us learned something from the exchange.
I'm going back, I'm going back, going back to Nassau. I'm going back, I'm going back to the best old place. I'm going back, I'm going back from all this. We'll clear the track as we go back to Nassau. Let's go back, let's go back from all this earthly life. We'll clear the track as we go back. We're going back to Nassau. We will clear the track as we go back. We're going back to Nassau.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed playing for you. Thanks.